Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we're going to end our series comparing the Stormtrooper Corps to the US Marine Corps. But before we begin, I'd like to pay my respect to all of our active duty military personnel and veterans out there. You guys are the thin line of defense that is protecting us from aliens and dolphins. Which is why in October we'll be collecting all the money we make that month from our Humanity First t-shirts and use it to arm our staff with harpoon guns. Just kidding, we'll be sending it to Operation Homefront. This is a great organization that directly funds veterans and their families' everyday needs, from paying their electrical bill to installing a new turbo laser turret in their backyard. Unlike some other larger charities, Operation Homefront makes sure 80 to 90% of your donation goes directly to its intended destination. They keep their upkeep and marketing costs to a minimum, which might be why you've never heard of them. Even though we here at Generation Tech do not agree with every military decision our country makes, we understand how to differentiate between the actions of our political leaders and our heroic military men and women. Now, if you don't want a t-shirt because you hate humanity, or maybe the United States has recently invaded your country, in which case I completely understand, just know that every t-shirt we don't sell will make humanity weaker against the oncoming alien dolphin onslaught. You can also donate directly to Operation Homefront. We'll link it down below. We'll also try to keep you guys updated on Facebook and also on YouTube here of how much money we've raised. Okay, so far we've talked about the organization, training, equipment, and vehicles of the Stormtrooper Corps and the US Marine Corps. Now let's take a look at how they use all of these resources on an actual battlefield. The Galactic Empire has a tremendous challenge ahead of them. They have to be able to govern and maintain stability across millions of different planets. Therefore, the Galactic Empire must allocate their resources in the most efficient and expedient way as possible. One of the primary tools they have available to them is roughly 25,000 Imperial-class Star Destroyers. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer has enough firepower to successfully subjugate an entire system and even an entire region. When it comes to Star Wars combat, he who controls the space controls the ground as well. So unfortunately for the US Marine Corps, it doesn't matter how much ass you're kicking on the ground. If your enemy is capable of bombarding you from orbit, you've already lost the ground battle. Fortunately for everyone else though, the Empire can't always use orbital bombardment, especially on populated worlds. You're just as likely to destroy enemy combatants as you are Imperial citizens, especially if you use this tactic on an Imperial city. And contrary to popular belief, most Imperial officers weren't completely evil and okay with such massive losses of human life. Keyword there is human. This is where the Stormtrooper Corps comes into play. A full legion is usually garrisoned on an Imperial-class Star Destroyer. These Stormtroopers are expected to carry out a wide range of missions, from boarding enemy ships, VIP protection, search and destroy missions, urban pacification, even full-on ground campaigns. It's this wide range of different scenarios that makes it especially tough to be a Stormtrooper. The Marine Corps' mission has been gradually expanding over the decades. Some even think Marine infantry is now encroaching into the territory of US Army combat arms. But traditionally speaking, the Marines are an expeditionary force, which means they are extremely mobile, quick to assemble, and quick to deploy. But now in 2018, the battlefield is drastically changing, with the majority of US forces withdrawn from Iraq and troop numbers in Afghanistan falling. Many of the conflicts that the United States is involved in, or technically not involved in, aren't all that clear from a geopolitical standpoint, which means there's been a rise in the use of units with smaller footprints like US Special Forces and contractors. That's not to say we don't have any use for the US Marines anymore. Now obviously I would love to live in a world where humanity is completely at peace and united against the rest of the galaxy, but until then the Marines represent a force that is able to deploy much quicker than regular Army infantry, but also is large enough of a fighting force with its own artillery, armor, and aviators to engage in prolonged combat indefinitely, which is something the Special Forces are not designed to do. The US Marines are kind of like the military's first responders. On top of that, they are relatively cost effective. In 2017, the Marine Corps had a budget of $25 billion, or only 4% of the entire military budget. Yet since 2011, the Marines have accounted for 12% of all military deployments. While the Marines do have the right tools for the job that they are required to do, they are considered lower tech than the other branches of the military. Now that's not always a bad thing. While other branches of the military are getting rid of bayonet training, it's still very much a part of the Marine culture. It not only helps teaches Marines how to be aggressive, it'll also be useful when the aliens destroy all of our technology in major cities and we'll have to rely on guerrilla tactics using hand-to-hand combat. The Stormtroopers are usually pretty successful when confronting criminal elements and civilian unrest. During the seizure of the rebel ship, otherwise known as the Tantive 4, the Stormtroopers showed their ability to seize a heavily fortified position within the narrow confines of a small diplomatic ship. Despite some heavy initial losses, the Stormtroopers were more than disciplined enough to push through and seize control of the entire vessel with minimal resistance. Although it should be noted that one Stormtrooper was outdrawn by a freaking princess. You really can't tell the mettle of a combat unit until they are facing certain casualties in battle. Stormtroopers have also been deployed as peacekeeping forces garrisoned in troubled areas of the galaxy. A large Stormtrooper presence was kept on the small ancient moon of Jeddah. During one confrontation with a local terrorist organization, a Stormtrooper patrol was ambushed by elements of the terrorist organization known as the Partisans. The Stormtrooper commander made several tactical errors during this mission. Instead of using air transport to quickly move the Kyber crystals, they used the TX-225 Occupier armored vehicle. As we mentioned in previous videos, the Occupier is actually more of an assault gun carrier rather than a tank or an infantry fighting vehicle. It's primarily used to support infantry units in extremely heavy urban fighting. It's used for destroying fortified enemy positions and also making new passageways in between buildings. But these tanks are incredibly intimidating and powerful and kind of send the wrong message to the people you're trying to peacefully occupy. The tank also lacks a turret, meaning the entire vehicle has to turn in order to aim the main gun, and for one reason or another, Stormtrooper Commander fails to close his hatch when the combat starts, leaving him unnecessarily exposed. It also seems like the troopers are relatively relaxed and not patrolling with disciplined spacing and awareness. Now, one of the most important parts of planning a convoy is making your route unpredictable. It's clear in this situation that the Partisans had studied Imperial forces in the area for some time. The ambush they set up is layered, and they even managed to set up some snipers on the roof. This says to me that the local Imperial garrison has gotten lazy and failed to alternate their routes, so it's now very easy to predict their movements. Although in their defense, it's possible that there are only a few main arteries in the city. So the Stormtrooper Corps is definitely not full of cowards, but at the same time they aren't necessarily as disciplined as the Empire would like you to think. Oftentimes, arrogant and stupid officers will really sabotage operations, especially because there's a strict command structure. While the Stormtrooper Corps has a solid group of veteran NCOs leading smaller squads, if they're deployed in a stupid position, they'll end up spending all of their time fighting their way out of it. The one thing you can expect of a Stormtrooper is that they will not wither in the face of enemy fire. The Second Battle of Fallujah, or Operation Phantom Fury, was perhaps one of the bloodiest battles for the United States since the Vietnam War. Several thousand hardened fighters, including former Ba'athist Party soldiers and also foreign jihadists, had spent months fortifying the city of Fallujah under the command of the Jordanian jihadist Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. A coalition of US, British, and Iraqi forces cordoned off the city in preparation for a massive assault. Half of the coalition forces, or around 6,500 men, were a part of the Marine Corps. All across the city, the terrorists had laid out different booby traps, IEDs, and landmines. They also blocked off the streets in an attempt to guide coalition forces into the path of prepared defensive positions, trenches, and machine gun emplacements. Sniper nests and spider holes were created, and ambushes were set up inside of houses. Although most of the civilians had left the city already, the US military did not have the option to completely flatten the city with bombs because it would be politically damaging for the mission. So on November 8, 2004, the Marines, along with the US Army and Iraqi Army, made a major push into the center of Fallujah. Marine commanders recognized beforehand the need for heavily mechanized infantry units and called the Army for help. Army cavalry and Navy Seabees in armored bulldozers helped spearhead the offensive and clear the roads. Marine regimental combat teams were also supported by Navy SEAL sniper teams. Chris Collar, the American sniper, was amongst one of those units. Marine recon snipers also provided advanced reconnaissance. Although the use of combined arms in an urban setting is usually limited, the Joint Air Command was able to facilitate multiple airstrikes using a plethora of different Air Force and Marine aircraft to destroy enemy-hardened positions, as well as potential IEDs. At the ground level, coalition infantry were able to coordinate with artillery units to provide direct fire and smoke to help them advance on targets. Bradley fighting vehicles and Abram tanks were used to attack hardened positions and oftentimes routed the enemy with devastating firepower. Fallujah, with its disorganized neighborhoods and cluttered streets, ended up being one of the most difficult battles of the entire war. Coalition forces suffered unavoidable heavy casualties fighting door-to-door against heavily prepared enemy fighting positions. The Marine Corps did have a slight advantage because of their larger rifle squad sizes. Now, it's really hard to understand what truly happened at Fallujah if you weren't there. But the result was that the coalition forces were able to clear out most pockets of enemy resistance from the city within 6 days. Although coalition forces suffered from 110 casualties and over 600 wounded, an estimated 1,500 to 2,000 enemy combatants were killed and another 2,000 were captured. This is actually a very impressive feat. Military operations in urban terrain are usually very heavily favored towards the defensive force, especially if they know the local terrain and have had proper time to prepare a defensive position. Even if they're facing a technologically and numerically superior force, the defensive side should be able to exact heavy casualties from the offensive side. The Second Battle of Fallujah is an example of the US Marine Corps successfully working alongside several other different coalition Army and Air Force assets to mitigate any advantage the defending enemy had. While this battle was far from being textbook, it shows that with enough firepower and coordination, no static defense can stand against a well-motivated Marine regimental combat team and their allies. So the Stormtroopers definitely have an edge when it comes to firepower and the technology of their equipment and vehicles. The Marines might have lower tech equipment and vehicles, but they're used in a much better way. But if we are looking at who the better fighter is, the equipment and vehicles shouldn't really matter. While both sides have incredibly brave and resilient infantry, the Marines are much better at adapting to combat situations and have a better leadership structure than the Stormtroopers. They're also more used to integrating with other branches of the military and using combined armed tactics. Well guys, let me know what you think about our series. I hope you did enjoy it, and if you do have the chance, please help us either by donating directly to Operation Homefront or going onto our Teespring website and ordering a shirt. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.